Hello, folks. Welcome to another bonus episode of Science Fiction Book Club. As always, I'm your host, Abu, and as always, I'm joined by my sec unit / friend, Opsa.
Gross. Not both. Oh, I can't stop looking at
You have to maintain eye contact with me this whole recording. Don't look away. Don't look away.
Garathan! Oh, yeah.
Oh, Garathan.
Garathan.
All right, folks. We are here to talk in this bonus episode about Murderbot on Apple TV Plus.
Oh, yeah.
The brand new show that just dropped today. We're here to talk about the first 2 episodes. You and I have watched episodes 1 and episodes 2. We have also, on this podcast, for the record, covered the first and second novella in the Murderbot Diaries, which, as far as I can tell, I think is probably the extent of what we're going to get from the TV show. I don't think it's going to get further into the series yet, at least in the first season.
Right.
So there's your spoiler warning, folks. All of those things are on the table as far as today's discussion goes. The first 2 novellas, which we've covered already in previous episodes, and the first 2 episodes of the show on Apple TV Plus. Make sure you have read and watched all of those things before you continue listening today.
That's right.
All right, Opsa, let's start high level as we always do when we talk about TV and movies. What are your sort of big picture thoughts before we drill down into specifics?
Yeah. It's been interesting. This is definitely, I'm finding to be kind of a unique show in the media landscape right now. There aren't a ton of shows that this exactly reminds me of. I think the closest, like the nearest neighbor I can think of is, I don't know if you've seen this, but The Orville.
I haven't, no.
Yeah, that's Seth MacFarlane's sci-fi series that is essentially a parody of Star Trek, but has a little more. I mean, I'll be more generous than calling it kind of a strict parody. It does end up being a little more sci-fi than a pure just kind of comedy. And I'm kind of having that experience with this show where it is sci-fi, but there is absolutely, and it reflects the novel, a good deal of comedy throughout. And I'm also just kind of noting the somewhat distinct look and feel of the show. It's not as like futuristic or you know what I mean? Like it's
totally.
It feels almost a little contemporary. It's kind of interesting. The set and costume design they've gone with for Murderbot. But I will say, just in a line, I am enjoying it. I'm finding that this is kind of scratching an itch I have right now. It's not serious. It's honestly kind of background watching, to be totally honest, but in a way that I'm totally fine with at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, how are you feeling about this? What's standing out to you?
I am in a similar boat, but maybe I come down slightly harsher than you, which is pretty typical for this podcast.
That sounds about right.
But actually, my thoughts are pretty aligned with yours. Yeah. I'm enjoying the visual aesthetic of the show quite a bit. Totally. I like that it's kind of like grounded and could almost be contemporary, but obviously it's science fiction. They're talking about warp holes and they're talking about aliens and mining missions and
the Corporation Rim.
The Corporation Rim. This takes place in a hypothetical far future, but the visual aesthetic could be something we see today. It could come out of Silicon Valley next year. I really also like the sort of cozy, soft vibe of the habitat, that they're given by the corporation. Obviously, they've dressed it up with some like hippy dippy stuff. But I like the visuals. I really like Murderbot's design as well. I think it's quite memorable.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think they've done a good job there. I will say the rest of the show, though, is not working for me, at least in these first 2 episodes so far. I am remaining open. I'm not trying to pass any sort of like final judgment. I'm remaining open for the show to grow on me, right? We still have 8 more episodes to go. It's a 10-episode first season.
Right.
So maybe the characters and the story will grow on me. These first 2 episodes didn't entirely sell me on it. We've already sort of established iconically on this podcast that I don't like comedy, and this show in these first 2 episodes seems to be going in a much more aggressively like sitcom vibe than I perhaps had anticipated.
Fair.
And the sort of goofy comedy of it all isn't really working, because I think what's interesting in the books is that Murderbot's internal monologue and Murderbot's sort of dry humor is in reaction to like quite serious things happening around him and the quite serious job he has.
Yeah.
But in the show, like everything is goofy. The meeting with the Corporation Rim was goofy.
Yeah.
The Preservation Ox crew, Garath and Mensa, Pinley, Rati, they're all just like so goofy all the time,
right?
That there's no contrast. You know, things are funny because other things are unfunny. But because we don't have those shades of black and white and even gray in the humor, it's all just like goofy, funny, weird, goofy, funny, weird.
Right.
Then for me, none of it becomes funny anymore.
Yeah.
So I that is rubbing me a little the wrong way, but I'm open to seeing it through to the end, of course. We'll cover it on the show here week by week, but so far I'm a little skeptical.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I can't really disagree with the thrust of your take there. I'm finding that I find it just like fun and kind of campy,
totally.
And you know, it kind of occupies its own niche in a way that I'm somewhat satisfied with. And I will say, just coming out of the books, I didn't find them to be so serious, or I didn't find the drama to be, you know, so kind of such depth that I had expectations that kind of align with that for the show. So the show, like, I mean, to be fair, it doesn't really have the drama or intensity of something like, say, The Expanse, or, you know, even the creepy kind of, you know, befuddling mystery of Silo, which we talked about.
Yeah.
But I kind of
the world-ending danger of Three Body Problem. You know, the stakes are not high in this show at all.
The stakes really are not very high, and for me, that kind of works in its favor. I'm going in with this expectation that this is light, this is funny, it's kind of tongue in cheek, and honestly, again, much like the Orville, it almost feels like a parody of sci-fi than it does sci-fi. Without in fact being the case, and I can totally
certainly
see.
Second screen viewing. You know, this it's not a crime to maybe be on your phone while you watch this show.
Right. I think that's
again, I think like from your perspective, like that's not a bad thing. Yes. This is not a show that you need to lock in on.
Right.
It's a show you're just enjoying.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the general flavor of how we're receiving the show in any case. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, let's drill into each episode a little bit and focus on the story and the characters.
Yeah.
I'm quite surprised to see that this is basically a 1-for-1 adaptation of the book so far.
Yeah. I mean, kind of awesome. I mean, there isn't a ton of deviation. I think obviously at the very outset, there's a slightly different explanation and scene for how Murderbot comes into its kind of full on empowerment and how it kind of hacks its governor module. But I actually rather enjoyed that first scene.
Me too.
Where you see like, you know, one of these station workers basically like holding a blowtorch to Murderbot's hand. And it's, I mean, it really just in a moment captures how little they think of the humanity of Murderbot, which, to be fair, I mean, it seems like not very many people recognize that, you know, Murderbot has a face and there is like a humanoid construct underneath its armor. But just kind of, you know, it feels very human. That's how we would treat, you know, essentially, you know, an android, a humanoid android.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure you've seen those clips of folks in LA and stuff beating up the Waymo cars, you know, just like throwing fucking like bottles, empty beer bottles at them and kicking them. And like those Waymo delivery robots that go drive around on the sidewalk and like deliver your Uber Eats to you.
Yeah. Like
there's people that just like walk up and kick them over. And so they can't get back up and they're like kicking their little wheels trying to get back up. Yeah.
Right.
So yes, I think the point stands. Like you're absolutely right. If a sec unit were a real thing, people would just be like beating that shit up for fun. and nobody would ever consider its humanity,
right?
Which of course so much of the books is about, you know, Murderbot breaking free of the governor module and coming into its own personhood.
Yeah.
What are you thinking so far of? We're only 2 episodes in, but of Alex Skarsgård as Murderbot, his performance. There's a lot of voiceover in this first episode, so we hear a lot from him. How is he landing for you so far as the title character?
Yeah, I honestly had my doubts coming into this, but
I did too.
I mean, I think he's honestly nailing it. As Murderbot, now that I've seen him, I can't unsee.
Right now, I'm going to read the books like only with him in mind.
Yeah, and I mean, like to some extent, he almost does like he's not forgettable, to be fair, but he almost does a good job of kind of making you forget that he has had previous roles, and that he is more than the Murderbot that we see on the show, and he feels very awkward and he feels extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah,
which is just so true to the books. So I'm totally appreciating his performance here.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there about the awkwardness and the discomfort.
Yeah,
I had a very difficult time. I watched and rewatched each of these episodes.
Yeah.
And both times, even though I knew what was coming on the rewatch, I had a very difficult time watching the scene where they're like, speech,
right.
Speech. And then Murderbot is just literally like,
petrified.
Panicking, petrified.
Yeah, totally.
I think they've nailed the awkwardness for sure for Murderbot. And for what it's worth in these first 2 episodes, I think Skarsgård is doing a good job embodying the role.
Yeah.
He is this weird, perfect balance of like kind of a menacing looking guy.
Yeah.
And like he gives a menacing vibe because I mean Murderbot is like a killer robot. That's its job.
Yeah, totally.
But also somehow being very weird and very awkward.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally.
I think he's doing a great job.
I agree. What about the rest of Preservation Alliance? Is there anybody that is less cringy to you than the others, or just stands out in some?
The cringe factor is definitely very high.
Yeah, I know it is for you.
I think for most of the cast,
yeah,
the cringe factor for me is quite high. I'm appreciating Mensa as the leader of this crew. We do get a lot of Mensa. We get more Mensa than the other characters.
Yeah.
In these first 2 episodes, I think Mensa's likable. I think her motivations are quite clear, and it's clear that she is the level-headed leader.
Right.
The others, though, like what I'm kind of annoyed by is that they're played off as these very like hippy-dippy leftist socialist,
right?
Like buffoons almost. Like they're doctors and researchers and scientists, and like these aren't dumb people.
Right.
They're just out of their depth in a dangerous situation, but that doesn't mean that they would be stupid or that they would be treating this like a Airbnb college weekend that they get to go,
Right.
So I'm a little bit bothered with how they've chosen to interpret, let's say, Preservation Ox and that crew.
Yeah.
Because I think in the books, it was at least very clear that these are professionals. These are experts in their field. They're here doing a field study on a job.
Right.
And perhaps they're out of their depth, but they aren't total idiots. And I think the cringiness and the immaturity of the crew, which again, I think kind of feeds into the comedy for me, is like someone's always got to throw like a quip in.
Right.
And it's like, or even sometimes not even a quip. Like I don't find the comedy in this particularly sharp or incisive or clever. Like it is sometimes just kind of like goofy, dumb comedy, which is okay, but all the time from every single character constantly.
Right.
That's starting to wear thin on me. And that's a tough thing to say just 2 episodes into a 10 episode show.
Yeah.
But I'm saying a lot about my feelings here. What about you? I'm curious if you have a softer take on the Preservation Ox crew.
Yeah, I mean, I think for shows like that, I mean, I'll be totally honest, like that totally lands with me as well. Like that is my impression of them. They are kind of like, they're a little overly goofy. And I think for me, I really do just go into it with an amount of, like belief suspension that is perhaps, off the charts high. And, I certainly don't find their characterization very plausible given their backgrounds as, scientists, engineers, people who have clearly, dedicated their life to thinking about hard problems in really rigorous ways. But at the first sign of danger, their first instinct, much like any like horror movie character, is to run towards it. Which I don't know. I mean, I know some scientists and plenty of engineers, and I think almost universally the instinct towards self-preservation is exceptionally high. So
if there is a more risk-averse category than a bunch of scientists, I have yet to see it,
Yeah, exactly. Lots of germaphobes in that group, I will say.
Certainly.
So no, I mean, I don't find their, depiction particularly authentic. But I honestly just readily overlook it. The comedy of their performance is, it's not as funny as slapstick would be, but it's a hair below that, and just enough to kind of keep me chuckling along. There's that scene when they're before the corporation committee and they need to attain consensus, and they get into this like,
oh my god, the humming circle,
kumbaya circle. And even Garathan, who
Garathan, get in here, buddy. Yeah,
and he's like,
that was genuinely funny.
Like they've got, and if it was fewer and further between, it would be overall like, you do need the contrast. And to your point, like there isn't enough of that contrast. There is just too much maybe laughing along the way, and it's like the friends we made along the way, and it's like, oh, okay, all right,
right, yeah. And like to kind of hone in on my point, I don't think the contrast has to be like, oh, the rest of the show has to be some like grim, dark, serious,
right?
Like I mean just like there has to be emotional contrast here. There has to be funny, lighthearted moments. There have to be like serious, not even like dead serious, but there have to be just like moments where like genuine conversation and connection is taking place.
Right.
And then, there have to be sort of emotional and gut punch moments. Like the reason Community is one of my all-time favorite shows, the sitcom Community, is because it doesn't forget to have a heart at its core between its characters.
Right.
And to balance the goofiness and the levity of it all with genuine moments of like heartfelt connection, which I think the balance is just off in these episodes. I will say in episode 2, there was that scene where Garathan is confronting Murderbot.
Right. And
Garathan asks Murderbot, what is it like to be you? And Murderbot's quite serious and heavy response is, I don't know what it's not like to be me. I can't answer that question.
Right.
I've only ever been me. And that to me, I was like, ooh, yes, we're scratching at some of the deeper sci-fi ideas that are present in the book.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be unfunny to get to those ideas. You don't have to get all grimdark and sci-fi and serious. So I really did appreciate that interaction between Garathan and Murderbot in episode 2.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it was particularly interesting because it was Murderbot who, in the book, certainly isn't a comedic figure per se, but does have, really, it's his commentary that drives, most of the humor.
Yeah.
And in the show, it's having to kind of play this dual role of being both the comedic relief to the comedy of the rest of the show, but also the voice of reason and like, and kind of pathos and like seriousness, to your point where, it feels like there are some stakes for Murderbot in what happens here. The rest of the crew might be, hell bent on their own destruction, but it's clear that Murderbot does not want to get melted down for parts, or whatever the case might be.
Totally. And that is one of the core tensions we're setting up in the story so far. Murderbot doesn't want to get caught.
Yes.
Okay. 2 things we should talk about, or at least 2 more things that I want to talk about before we wrap up. 1, the Sanctuary Moon sequences.
Yes. I was going to say
10 out of 10, I will say.
100%. I'm so happy that we got to see those. So good.
I am loving the Sanctuary Moon sequences.
Totally.
And again, if you're going to be over the top and hokey, that's the scene to do it.
100%.
That's the moment to do it.
100%. Yeah, it is fantastic.
It's absolutely working.
Definitely. I mean, and I love also that it's like, it's quite a star-studded crew.
I know, the cameos.
Yeah, the cameos is just so good. And it is to your point, like it is hokey, and that was Murderbot's commentary throughout the book as well. That these like the show is like it's so silly and it's really not true to life, and then you get to watch it, watching the show, and you can still see how amusing it is for Murderbot, and it's delightful.
It's delightful. A big fan of that. I really like the creative choices there.
Yeah.
Did you have thoughts? I have thoughts, but I'm curious to hear from you. Did you have thoughts on the throuple contract bit in episode 2?
Yeah. I don't know what to make of it exactly, because having read the books, like it doesn't play any role, in the like story 0. There. So I kind of know it's not going anywhere, which, essentially makes it a bit of a dead end for me as far as the show goes. Like I can't really pay much attention to it. I suspect, that there's going to be some drama that's caused by the throuple,
right?
But,
maybe, yeah.
But it's kind of like there aren't any real stakes here. I don't care about any of their feelings in this. Like clearly they've thought or not thought about it very, very hard and have signed a legal document for some reason. But I mean, I can't say I'm particularly invested in what seems to me to be a bit of a subplot around the three of them. But
yeah.
Anyways, tell me how are you feeling about our favorite throuple?
Not our favorite throuple. Yeah. I'm also, so here's my like over intellectualized take on this.
Yeah.
I am actually kind of bothered with the way this throuple storyline is in this show. Mainly because I quite admire in Martha Wells' novellas how gender norms, relationship norms, family norms are just different and varied. And no one bats an eye. Right? There are moments where Murderbot will like look into the background or history of a client and be like, oh yeah, their two mothers and their creche mates who are in a 5 female person family unit raised them or something, And like Martha Wells doesn't dwell on that at all. It'll be like one sentence in the book and it never comes up again.
Totally.
Because it's just world building. It's just establishing that this world and this society seem to be beyond normal constraints of gender and relationship.
Right.
This show seems to have taken that world building idea and turned it into the butt end of like a C plot joke.
Totally.
And that bothers me primarily because Preservation Ox is already played off as this like sort of goofball youngster leftist woke idiots.
Right.
And so to then have a throuple plot take place between them just so you can sort of joke about it is not, to me, genuine world building like the way Martha Wells handles it in the books. It's not nuanced world building that maybe adds commentary or layers to the show.
Yeah.
All it is like some boomer writer's interpretation of how Gen Z people think.
Yes.
Oh, like the Gen Z kids, they're into like thruples and three-ways now.
Right.
So let's make fun of that.
Right.
And maybe that's not the direct intention, but it certainly feels like the misinterpretation of the way Martha Wells very delicately, very casually handled the world building in her stories, in the original stories. So there's my I realize that's like I'm already thinking way too much about a show that does not beg this much thought, but that's kind of my sort of, it rubbed me the wrong way, and it only hit me on a rewatch. At first I watched it and I was like, that's dumb, but whatever.
Yeah.
And I kind of moved on from the throuple plot. On a rewatch, I was like, in the book, Martha Wells would have handled this better.
Yeah.
The show is kind of using it as the butt end of a joke, and that feels kind of icky.
Yeah. I'm honest. Wow. Honestly, I think I'm so happy you raised that point. And it's something that totally overlooked. But you're absolutely right. In the book, Martha Wells, I think, moves the conversation forward in a way that's really interesting and subtle and kind of understated. And that is certainly one of the things that's lost when you watch these first 2 episodes. You really get the distinct feel that this is honestly not even really contemporary comedy. This is a little dated.
It's a little dated.
It's a little dated. So no, I think that's a really astute observation. And I know Martha Wells is, one of the producers or, attached to the show in any case. And I wonder, I have to imagine that's one of the things that, she was just kind of pulling her hair out about.
Yeah. And you never know how much influence an author actually gets on their adaptation,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, regardless, I'm coming in here hot guns blazing, like quite critical of the show. But again, I want to reiterate, Sanctuary Moon stuff, 10 out of 10. I'm at least here for that. And I am open to letting the show and these characters warm up on me. You know, maybe my initial impressions will be incorrect. And, 4 or 5, 6 episodes in, I'll be cheering for the Preservation Ox crew. And I hope that's the case. So I'm going to continue to watch the show with an open mind and allow myself to be swept up in the story if that's the case.
Yeah. I will say, if it's only Murderbot that stands out as being the only character that we can really love, well, that's not a terrible thing either. If the rest of them end up just serving as a foil for the glorious Murderbot, who we certainly adore, then so be it, say I.
All right, folks, there's our little bonus episode about the first 2 episodes of the Murderbot TV show on Apple TV Plus. Stay tuned, because we will be back every Friday for the next 8 weeks.
Oh yeah.
To talk about every new episode of the Murderbot show as it drops on Apple TV Plus. So we'll see you next Friday to talk about episode 3. Until then, just remember, folks, boldness is all.
I was waiting for it. Nice.